now is the time to start acting on the transition to post-quantum cryptography. And I think Microsoft brings a particularly unique perspective to this because we are firsthand witnesses to the progress that we're making towards quantum computing, as well as the challenge of this transition.
Welcome to Shielded, the last line of cyber defense by PQ Shield, the podcast where we are moving the conversation around post-quantum cryptography from the why to the how. I'm Jo Lintzen, your host, and I'm here to guide you through the challenges, innovations, and solutions that will help your organization stay secure in the quantum era. Let's future-proof your defenses together. Today, we're joined by a seasoned cybersecurity leader and public-private sector expert, Kevin Reifsteck, Director for Critical Infrastructure Protection at Microsoft. Kevin is here to share his perspective on how organizations and governments can navigate the transition to quantum-safe security, prioritize critical systems, and lead by example in preparing for the quantum era. Kevin, thank you so much for being here today.
Well, thank you for having me. I'm really excited about this.
Absolutely. So first off, maybe you can share a little bit about your particular role within Microsoft and how you work with and influence the PQ migration plan and efforts within your organization.
Yeah, definitely. So at Microsoft, I work within our customer security and trust division, and I'm a director for cybersecurity policy. And part of my focus within that is on quantum safe policy efforts, as well as critical infrastructure protection. So those are two things that I work very closely on. In that role, I kind of have two key things that I do for Microsoft, particularly to quantum safe policy. One is advising our internal engineering teams on the evolving policy landscape, regulations, laws, other activities that governments are doing. And what does that mean for how we need to adjust our engineering plans and activities to be able to not only be compliant ourselves, but also enable our customers to be compliant. The other thing that I do is engage with governments globally to advise them on the risks of quantum computing to cryptography, and how governments can most effectively work with the private sector and others to transition to quantum safety. And so it's kind of both externally facing and helping to influence, as well as internally facing, influencing internally as well.
Yeah, two very different sides of the same coin, I can imagine.
Yeah.
So with that, with those external and internal facing activities, I think you're perfectly suited to give us a perspective on why now, why is now the time for organizations and governments alike to prioritize quantum safe cybersecurity and the migration towards that.
Yeah, I think, now is the time to start acting on the transition to post-quantum cryptography. And I think Microsoft brings a particularly unique perspective to this because not only are we a cybersecurity company and an IT vendor, but we're also heavily involved in the research and development of quantum computing. And so we are firsthand witnesses to the progress that we're making towards quantum computing, as well as a lot of our competitors and others around the globe. And it's because of that recognition of the progress in combination with the challenge of this transition to post-quantum cryptography, the length of time that we know it's going to take to happen, that we know that the transition needs to start now. Because if we wait until the day a quantum computer exists, it's going to be too late. Not only because of the threat that happens at that day, but also the harvest now, decrypt later threat that many of us are aware of.
So again, two sides of the coin, right? Developing quantum computing on one hand, of course, with the focus on solving real world challenges, and the side effect of being able to crack conventional encryption rather easily. And then on the other hand side, providing the security to protect against those threats that are coming up, right? So from a Microsoft perspective, how do you approach that challenge of building post-quantum resilience across quite a broad spectrum of products and services, right? And you do mention working with the engineering team. So immediately one thinks of, roadmaps and timelines. So maybe you can speak a little bit to that aspect of the migration effort.
Yeah, I think, first there's kind of the process that's involved when you have a company as broad as Microsoft into making this transition. From a Microsoft perspective, we created something called the Quantum Safe program several years ago now. And in that time frame over the last few years, there's been a lot of progress in terms of understanding where the risk lies across Microsoft, what it's going to take to transition across all our products and services over that time. And sort of what we've announced in the last year in terms of an update to our Quantum Safe program is really a timeline and roadmap for making that transition a reality. So just earlier this year, we committed to transitioning all our products and services. Our aim is to do that by 2033, a couple of years before the 2035 date, where most governments are kind of coalescing around for the transition. But we don't want to just make that happen by 2033. We really want to roll out capabilities to our customers by the year 2029. And so we're hoping to have capabilities even before 2029 as they become ready. But our real goal is across all our products and services to have some capabilities before that. And so what's really key for a company as large as Microsoft, there's the old analogy of having the aircraft carrier and having to turn it in the ocean. You can't necessarily, as a engineering strategy, tell every product and service exactly what they need to do or how to do it or on what timeline to do it. What we have to do is create a strategy and a goalpost, and then ask each of the product and service groups who know their products the best, what do you need to do, and what is the timeline on which you can do it to meet this goal? And so that's really the strategy that we're taking at Microsoft.
Yeah. So of course you mentioned the global timelines that are being communicated by really governments across the globe, and Microsoft taking a slightly more aggressive approach to this, also acknowledging the role that you play in the global digital supply chain, right? If organizations are tasked with migrating by 2030 or 2035 respectively, obviously being able to source quantum safe solutions, services, and products prior to those deadlines is going to help in eventually getting as close as possible to those dates, to those timelines. Now, of course, there's always a big push in the compliance regulatory landscape. And I think, as we spoke in preparation of this podcast, you've spoken that, regulations, of course, can always be seen as a blocking or an enabling, a force. So from your perspective, from your experience, what's your recommendations for governments, so that they effectively enable rather than hinder with the compliance and regulations that they put out there, and eventually become a true accelerator for that global migration?
Yeah, no, I think one of the biggest things that we've been advocating for governments to do is really make the transition to post-quantum cryptography and quantum safety a priority in their national cybersecurity plans. I think a part of that is also ensuring that there's someone who has the responsibility and accountability for making that happen. And that's going to be a key part of that. In terms of critical infrastructure sectors, I think there's a lot of opportunity still for governments, number one, to build awareness, particularly within high-risk sectors where data has long longevity, about the need to start this transition now. So I think the financial sector, in my view, has done a lot of good work in this space. They're starting to move already, and they're one of the most advanced sectors. And I think a big part of that is some of the efforts that are happening in terms of regulators bringing attention to this issue, as well as kind of the resources and expertise that the financial sector brings. I think there are other sectors where government awareness building is going to be more helpful. So the healthcare sector, there's not as many big players. Some of the regulation is more dispersed. And so I think there's a big role for governments to play to really bring more awareness to the individuals, organizations in those sectors about the need to make this transition and start making this transition now. And you can't really think of any more sensitive data that lives a long time than people's healthcare data. In some ways, I'm more worried about that data than I am financial sector data.
Right. And they certainly have a lot of the similar challenges that the financial service sector also faces, right? Sticking with governments and policymakers for a moment here, you kind of lay out the ideal scenario. So on the flip side, what are some of the common misconceptions that you see or you face in your discussions with the policymakers around the PQC and the migration towards quantum safe systems?
More common misconceptions or challenges that I see, particularly with policymakers who maybe don't have as much of an in-depth understanding of what this transition is that there might be a tendency to think, well, this is just switching out an algorithm and it's just changing a little bit of code in software. And yeah, maybe it'll take some time to potentially get everybody speaking the same language in terms of interoperability, but it's not that hard. But in some cases, that's truer than others. And so I'm not going to say there aren't cases when it can be relatively simpler. But when you think of something like a hyperscale cloud provider such as Microsoft, and you're thinking about a data center that's sending communications out on the scale that's happening to support a data center, that is a lot of encryption that's happening. That's a lot of computing power. There's a lot of specialized hardware equipment that goes into making that encryption happen efficiently and quickly. And you don't necessarily just change those systems out every couple months or every couple weeks. So that's an example that's very pertinent to a cloud service provider. But you can also take something like the energy sector and maybe complicated operational technology systems that are running a power generator within a power generation facility. Those systems often aren't changed out for 20 or 30 years sometimes. And so each of those cases has unique considerations and challenges in terms of making this PQC transition. That's not as simple as just switching out some code. So that's a very common misconception I come across.
Right. And if you look at it from the perspective of a data center, the back end, things like power consumption, cooling and those type of challenges are certainly playing an important role when you consider how different some of those new algorithms behave in that environment. And then as you bring up the energy sector and long-lived but very resource-constrained devices that are sort of the edge devices, millions of them out there. No one obviously is going to rip and replace, so you have to come up with good ideas on how to retrofit those brownfield environments, and that's certainly true for
energy requirements or the processing requirements that are sometimes larger. You also have bandwidth considerations in terms of some of the algorithms and the key sizes that will have to be transmitted will be different than what we're used to for our communication previously. So that all creates unique circumstances that have to be engineered with around and dealt with.
Yeah, very much so. Where you often see some architectural changes required to approach the secure communication between those distinct endpoints. So back to the healthcare sector. We kind of agreed that they face very similar challenges to the financial services industry. Where do you see the particular gaps within the healthcare, and what do you think needs to happen to raise awareness and also accelerate adoption there?
Yeah, so within the U.S., a lot of awareness building is usually done through CISA, as well as the Sector Risk Management Agency, which for the healthcare sector in the U.S. is the Health and Human Services Agency, HHS. And so I think through the public-private partnership efforts that typically happen between the healthcare sector and the government, I think there's a broad opportunity to use that to bring awareness to this issue, create resources that different types of organizations can use to help them transition to post-quantum cryptography because of the diversity of the stakeholders across the sector. But then I think, to speak from kind of a Microsoft responsibility, a lot of those organizations are going to be smaller organizations that are going to rely on their vendors to kind of make this transition so that their software or hardware has the capabilities in it. So I think there's going to be a big responsibility, not only for players like Microsoft, but specialized vendors that maybe sell software or hardware to the health industry to enable these organizations, whether it's your doctor's office or a rural hospital, to be able to become quantum safe without having to become experts on quantum safety or post-quantum encryption. So there's kind of going to have to be a different approach depending on the stakeholder and their sophistication. And then there's probably going to be a role for regulation in the sense of HIPAA and the privacy regulations that exist within the healthcare sector. I think at some point is going to have to think about what is the role for healthcare regulation in terms of ensuring the protection of this information going forward, and what's the right approach to using regulation to encourage and incentivize this transition.
Right. So in that sector, but certainly also very true for many other sectors as well. A lot of those standards are of global nature, right? So do you see yourself in a lot of conversations with, you mentioned you're going to visit Japan and Singapore over the next couple of weeks. So in those conversations with those particular countries, is the global coordination oftentimes coming up? I would imagine it's important to avoid too much fragmentation, to have the interoperability.
Yeah, no. So for us, the advocacy around using global standards, whether that's for algorithms or for integration of those algorithms into standard protocols, is a huge part of our advocacy when we approach governments worldwide, as well as in terms of the transition planning. We're very encouraged by the fact that multiple governments around the world are creating roadmaps and plans and timelines around when they want to see government systems or even private organizations transition. And we've seen good signs into general alignment of those with some small discrepancies. But as more governments start to do this, our advocacy has been for governments to align those timelines so as not to create conflicting obligations or requirements for industry to the maximum extent possible. So I think by and large, we've been encouraged in terms of what we've been seeing from the US, EU, Canada, Australia. I would say generally aligned. The one thing that gives us pause is there are these small differences that right now maybe aren't a huge challenge, but there are areas that we're watching to make sure they don't become more of an issue going forward.
Right. So things like, regional variants of the standard algorithms, or, altogether other key establishment mechanisms like Photochem that is being advocated by the EU maybe, but not so much by the US. And that, of course, leads us into the question of data sovereignty and data residency within that context, which for a global service provider like Microsoft, I'm sure is a topic that comes up a lot as well, given global privacy regulations like NIS2 and others. So maybe you can share a little bit about that as well.
Yeah, I think in terms of when we talk about the quantum safe transition, what we really want to do is enable our customers to the maximum extent possible to choose the cryptographic quantum safe solution that meets their regulatory or legal requirements and their risk profile. And so to the extent possible, we plan to enable our customers to make that choice. I think where it can get tricky in terms of governments creating different requirements, if you think of, a global cloud provider where we have to, on the back end, communicate kind of with infrastructure across, continents or across the globe. If one country says you have to use this in your infrastructure and another country says you have to use that, it could create interoperability challenges. So there's kind of the difference between, what can we choose on the back end for how we run our infrastructure and encryption on our infrastructure versus what can be a customer choice within their system of choosing their algorithms. That being said, I think it's, the direction we are headed is whether it's NIST algorithms or algorithm standardized through ISO. I think those are all kind of things that we are aiming to eventually make available to our customers. I think, if there are countries standardizing algorithms outside of that or standardizing protocols outside the IETF, which we haven't really seen much of yet. But those are things that could get trickier in terms of maintaining interoperability on the internet.
Right. Yeah. And then, looking at, we spoke about this earlier, of course, this is a timeline. Migration isn't easy, as you rightfully said. It's not as simple as just, swapping out an algorithm here or there. It is going to be a multi-year effort, somewhere around 2030, 2035, maybe. But even the longest journey, as they say, starts with a first step, right? And so maybe we can speak a little bit about the, most critical first steps that organizations should take to be able to make it a relatively smooth transition in again, how to maintain that compatibility. Also considering the fact that whenever you speak to a CISO of any organization, they're going to be like, well, I have things that I need to take care of today. And this seems to be, something that's looming more in the future. So maybe you can share some insights around that topic as well.
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, I think the first step that every organization can take at the strategic level is to, similar to what we advocate for governments, but making sure that this is on your list of priorities, or if not priorities, at least that you put someone in charge of analyzing the issue and coming back with a plan and recommendation for a way forward over the next year. Once you have someone that's kind of accountable for assessing the organization's risk, I think the first thing that they have to be able to do is start with an assessment and analysis of where is the data of most risk to your organization when you think about the quantum threat. So again, the quantum threat, particularly right now, the threat that we think about is harvest now, decrypt later. So where is that data that, if in 10 or 15 years it was decrypted, could still have, impacts on your organization because it's very valuable intellectual property or it's very personal information of your customers. And then you can prioritize on what do you need to do to protect those data sources and kind of focus there instead of getting lost in where I think some people look at the advice. It's like, I need to understand what every piece of cryptography is across my entire enterprise and landscape. And I think that can become very overwhelming very quickly for a lot of organizations.
Okay. So one of those approaches that one can take, of course, is to also go in that migration process with a hybrid approach, combining classical and post-quantum. Is that a topic that you get asked about, that you sort of are being asked to recommend on?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a topic that comes up quite a bit. And from a government policy perspective, we're seeing different governments or even organizations within governments advise different things. So the recent EU roadmap had a strong recommendation for using hybrid solutions where possible. On the other end of the spectrum, you have NSA in the US for national security systems, which you could imagine might have some of the most sensitive of data, saying that, PQC-Only approach is the way to go. I think from a Microsoft perspective, for the most part, again, we want to enable our customers to use the encryption that they're comfortable with, that meets their requirements and their risk profile. And so we're really trying to the extent it's possible, provide the cryptographic choices to our customers that they want to make, and that's kind of where we're at right now. I think that the concern we have, as different governments have these different leans, our advocacy is just don't go in any directions in terms of requirements that could harm interoperability on the internet or for a cloud service provider in our infrastructure. Keep those kind of things more limited to organizational level challenges to the extent possible. So that's an area we continue to kind of watch, just to make sure that any requirements, laws, regulations don't potentially box us in, not only us, but others in the ecosystem, and create interoperability challenges.
Mm. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So with those global standards bodies that you've mentioned, sort of in the conversation, I mean, of course, we have, NIST with the standardization of the algorithms, 3 that are already public, a 4th one that is forthcoming, and then, a 5th one that we'll probably see in 2 years' time or so. Of course, the standards for the algorithms are merely the starting point, and we see now that trickling through the protocol level. And you mentioned ISO, IETF. How is Microsoft active within those organizations, and why is it so important to participate and provide insights to those standardization efforts as well?
Yeah, so I mean, Microsoft has been very active from the start of the original NIST call for algorithm development and standardization. So Microsoft Research has been co-contributors on, I believe, 5 different submissions throughout the NIST process. And Frodo Kim, which is currently going through the ISO process, is another one we've been contributors to. Similarly, within IETF, we're very active in the different process to integrate algorithms into protocols like TLS and others. And so it's definitely an active area. I think for all our products and services are hugely dependent on these protocols and these algorithms and securing customer data. And so ensuring that those algorithms and the protocols are secure and robust is critical to maintaining government and the public's trust in digital infrastructure and technology. And so we have a huge stake, as well as other companies in the ecosystem, to ensuring that whatever comes out of those processes maintains that trust in the digital infrastructure and keeps people wanting to invest and be active in that infrastructure.
That's certainly the direction that we're going. We're seeing with those global standardizations. Now, is there a little bit of a difference in the timeline as far as you're concerned, if we talk about the standardizations of the key establishment mechanisms versus the signature side of things and certificates? I know there's some work currently being done in IETF, in particular on the certificate formats. Is that something that you come across as well?
I mean, I think, what comes across is there's a lot of discussion around the challenges, as well as debates and opinions on what the right way to transition certificates into this post-quantum world. It goes back to kind of the hybrid debates and do we transition straight away? So, I mean, I think in terms of timelines, and it's not just for the PKI or certificate debate, but for all these things, there's a huge dependency for this transition in a lot of ways on the standards organizations kind of finalizing these standards. And so that is a risk that is out there in terms of the ability to meet some of these timelines. I think from a Microsoft perspective, we're taking an optimistic approach that these things will come to fruition on the timeline that we've announced. But we're realistic that if they don't, there may be areas where, in terms of the timelines that we've announced, we may have to modify based on the dependencies that we might not be able to fully control. So I think it is a huge challenge that, not only we face, but the entire ecosystem faces. And we're just going to have to keep working hard within the standards bodies to hopefully bring things to a good spot so that we can all move forward together.
Yeah. So, and I think, with your own sort of internal transition, Microsoft has been quite transparent in sharing lessons learned through various vehicles, blog posts, and presentations on global events and participations in round tables. So maybe in a few words, what are some of the most valuable lessons you think that you sort of gotten out of your own internal transition, and maybe there were some surprising ones in there as well that others could benefit from.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think two of the biggest lessons that I think I've taken away from the process, I mean, number one is just the challenge that it can take to inventory cryptography across your enterprise. It's not a trivial matter, right? And so that's why really, particularly when it comes to most organizations, your average organization, I really emphasize kind of figure out how to focus on what's most important, because otherwise you'll get overwhelmed. So that's kind of lesson one. I think lesson two, and this is more for large organizations or for governments, is just how important it is to have that strategic emphasis and buy-in on the need for this transition. We've talked about the challenge about this is, seemingly a long-term threat, and we've got all these other things that we are worried about right now. So why do this now? And so having that strategic leadership and foresight and emphasis on, this is an important thing that our organization needs to do, and we're going to make space and resources and time available to make this transition is hugely important. It seems like such a small thing, but it really isn't. And so that's why we really emphasize with governments, it needs to be a priority. You need to put someone in charge, because if you don't have someone in charge, it's just something nice that's on a piece of paper that no one's actually effectuating.
Right. Yeah. And it sounds like that's a process that probably works best if it is driven top down rather than bottom up.
Yeah, I mean, I think the key thing is if you have that leadership buy-in and emphasis, I think if the organization sees that leader can put someone more junior or lower down in the totem pole in charge if they've got the authority of the leader to move it forward, right? And so, but I think without that imprimatur of the leadership that this is going to happen, and the ability of someone lower in the organization, if they're facing roadblocks or challenges or resources aren't aligning, they can quickly get overwhelmed. So they need to be able to go back to that leader and get that support to make things happen if needed.
Right. And I think beyond sort of those internal challenges and strategies to approach this, of course, there's also a lot of external partnerships and open forums that also help in fostering this process. And are there any organizations, partnerships in particular that stand out to you that we haven't spoken about yet that Microsoft actively participates in, that are maybe interesting for our listeners to take a look at as well?
Yeah, one that kind of immediately comes to mind is there's the Post-Quantum Cryptography Coalition that MITRE organizes, and several other companies participate in. I actually think they have a event coming up later this year where they'll be having a number of presentations from various companies on the transition and progress going towards it. So I think it's a very active group that MITRE helps organize, that provides a lot of useful resources on how the transition's going and what the opportunities are to kind of move faster or accelerate that. And they're constantly looking for others to join up and get involved. So if you're interested, please definitely look them up.
Yeah. That's certainly a very active and global working group organized by MITRE there. Now, we've talked a lot about sort of your journey thus far and, sort of look back a little bit. If you were to look ahead for the next, say, 5 to 10 years, that seems to be the horizon that we're talking about. What do you think is going to happen with, what are the biggest shifts or innovations that will define, this quantum migration at scale? Is it the quantum computer? Is it AI? Which one is it?
Well, I mean, I think in terms of the transition to post-quantum computing, I think the thing that is going to be most impactful in terms of driving this at scale, unfortunately, might be the thing that nobody really hopefully notices if it goes well, which is, our large technology providers, the Microsofts and others in the world, will do such a great job of integrating this into our everyday products and services that the vast majority of the population maybe doesn't even notice that it happens, right? So maybe that's an underwhelming answer. I think, some of the things that, most people won't see that will be kind of the more key innovations are going to be the things around for those systems that you can't easily transition. What are the alternative risk management scenarios that can happen? What are the add-on hardware that you can put on to your operational technology to protect those communications when you can't just buy a new one? What are the hardware accelerators that are going to run within data centers or other specialized hardware to make these new algorithms run more efficient and faster? And, one of the interesting things when you think about hardware accelerators, one of the buzzwords we haven't talked about on this call is crypto agility. And ways in which hardware acceleration can be crypto agile, such that, let's say we find a vulnerability in one of these algorithms and need to switch to another algorithm. Well, are our hardware accelerators still going to be useful at that point, or are we going to have to switch out all the hardware acceleration? I'm not sure we really have answers to that. So I think there are some unique challenges and problems at the hardware layer and in some of these more niche cases. But I think for your average user, if things go well, most of this is probably going to go relatively unnoticed, hopefully.
Yeah. No, I think that's a very optimistic view. And I think it's also a very realistic view that, basically what you're saying is 80% of the cases are going to be a no-brainer and they're going to be happening, more or less transparently to the end user. The supply chain is just going to update itself. But then you're going to have those 20% of sort of the fringe cases that are going to be a little bit more complex, a little bit more involved, and, even more important, likely for organizations to understand what they have today and how they have to approach it to mitigate that risk, right? So I think that's a very, 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 like I said, optimistic view of things. So I like that. I like optimism. That's great. Anything else that you want to share with our listeners? Any good place to follow your work, your projects, your efforts?
No, I think, just keep monitoring Microsoft and, our Quantum Safe program is the program that we have. We just had our announcement in the last few months where we laid out our roadmap and our timelines. And, we hope, in another year or two, as our various products and services kind of work on their implementation of those deadlines, to come back with more details on how various products and services are going to be delivering on that kind of vision over the next few years.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much for sharing your expertise, Kevin. It's been an enjoyable and very insightful conversation. Appreciate you taking the time.
Yeah, thank you for having me. This has been great.
Absolutely. And to our listeners, as always, thanks for sticking with us. Don't forget to follow us, like, and recommend for your peers. Stay safe, stay vigilant, stay shielded. Until next time. Thanks, Kevin. The quantum era is already here. With the right tools, the right knowledge, and the right mindset, together we can face it head on. To find out more about PQ Shield and how our cutting-edge solutions can help you secure your data against the quantum threat, visit pqshield.com. Make sure to search for Shielded, the last line of cyber defense in Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or anywhere else you get your podcasts. Don't forget to click subscribe so you never miss an episode. On behalf of the team here at PQ Shield, thanks for listening.